Greetings from triple digits, California. Well, it's not quite there yet, but it is climbing quickly. And being that I'm already a furnace, it doesn't help matters for me. And so just decided to blab my mouth just for the sake of reminding people that I haven't fallen off the map. Had a great time preaching a revival in Alamogordo. Great church, great field revival there. God's doing some great work there under Pastor McGinnis, and so it's always a blessing to be a part of their services there. And then this weekend, my wife and I, we got away down into San Diego, got out of the heat just in time. It was kind of orchestrated just right. I think we got a high of 78 degrees there. And the natives there were complaining about how hot it was. I'm like, man, Lord have mercy. I says, you don't even realize how hot it is where I live. So anyways, could be worse. I could be a place where it's, hot forever, but thank God for Jesus, I'm not. And so just wanted to, ramble on about some things on my mind for several weeks now. Cheers. Got my world's greatest dad shirt on, in case you're wondering. And I'm sure there's a lot of us that can claim that title, especially if you're saved. And so I was thinking about one of the catchphrases of the day, and that is toxic masculinity. Now, I know there are maybe a few men listening to this or watching this, however, turns out, that you fall into that same category as myself and others do. What happened is that President Trump, when he was running for office, running for president, he came off very confident and to some arrogant, and that bothers people, especially when they're limp-wristed and have no spine, that somebody could speak with such confidence and walk in a sense of dominion and authority. And so that seems to be an issue in the day and hour that we live, and also seems to be lacking in the male gender. And so what it is that people, men, who have, especially those who have and I'm not talking about, how much you bench press or, how well you shoot or, how, competitive you are. All those things, they're nice. That's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the masculinity, especially the toxic masculinity of our day. What I'm talking about is a spiritual backbone. Men that are capable of leading their family, capable of being not only faithful to their workplace, to that environment which they, partake every day, but that they can actually set a tone of dominion, authority, confidence. They kind of, for some, bothers people. It doesn't bother us that, are assured of ourselves because of our walk with Christ and because of our stand in the truth. And so, morally speaking, our nation needs more toxic masculinity. Men with a spine that would stand for truth, that would lead their families, that would love their wives, that would be faithful in the kingdom of God, and the reason I say this is because, I don't know where President Trump is. He made the comment about the passing of his brother the other day, that he will see him again. I pray that President Trump, if he's not saved, shall be saved. I pray that God surrounds him with godly counsel all the time, that, that God strengthens him and helps him. He's under continual assault. Part of the reason is not just that he's a Republican. Part of the reason is that he is actually one of these toxic males who leads with authority, who says what he means and does what he says. And this bothers the lame stream media that is given over to their own hypocrisy and delusion, and where the left and the liberals want to basically neuter all males, and has been ongoing since who knows how long, as far as I can remember. Even back in the 90s, I remember reading a book entitled One Nation Under Therapy, and it was written by a woman who, in her observation, she saw from her viewpoint how the education system and society as a whole was trying to neuter males. You know, if you remember, you could see them starting to take away prizes in schools. Nobody wins anything, nobody loses. Everybody gets a prize just for participating. And so this has been going on and on and on and on. So when somebody like President Trump, who has a lot of, visibility, it comes into a place where everybody's complaining. You know what? It makes me feel good that, hey, there are still men out there with a spine. And so men out there that, that are confident in their vocation, confident in their walk in Christ, confident in who they are as a child of God. And this is what America desperately needs. I recently preached a sermon there in the Alamogordo Church, and actually wrote it there, and it was entitled "Violent Faith in the Midst of a Fear-Filled World." And I couldn't help but, think about David, and he was part of the inspiration, how he came on a scene and there was a tyrant that was mocking God, mocking the people of God, basically putting in check an entire army simply by talking down to them and challenging, and no one would rise up. And yet this young man comes up, and he is motivated, he is stirred to do something about this tyrant. And in that, I mentioned about the Black Robed Brigade. This is the backbone of the revolution, the part of history they didn't teach you in school. Okay, like for instance, the midnight rite of Paul Revere. That night, when he crossed that river to warn the townspeople and the villages surrounding Lexington and Concord, he went to a pastor's house, who was also the leader of the militia at that particular time in that area. It was the pastors of the day that General Washington had enlisted their help, not only to pray for the nation, but also these men had been talking from their pulpits, rallying their congregation, rallying their men that says, you know what? Tyranny is at our doorstep. These tyrants want to shut us down, our liberties, our freedoms, overtaxing us, bringing us under their control. We see a lot of that today. They're trying to control the church, trying to shut down the church, trying to put on restrictions on the church. But this Black Robe Regiment is what they were called by the Brits. It says these were the men that were the backbone of this revolution, because they were speaking and preaching from the pulpit about the necessity to not just talk about it, but to actually take a stand and to fight. Now, I'm not saying that we're calling people to arms, okay? So don't get me wrong. But I do say that it's time for men, Christian men, to take a stand. Enough is enough for the tyranny, okay? There was preachers in that day that would come to the pulpit. All these men wore black robes in the pulpit. That's why they call them the Black Robe Brigade. And so one particular individual, he would come and set his muskets on each side of his message, preach his sermon, and then pick up his muskets, put them back in. On one occasion, a man challenged his congregation, the men in his congregation. He says, now, he says, he talked on Ecclesiastes, there's a time for everything. A time for peace, a time for war. And he says, now is the time to war. And then he challenged his congregation, the men in his congregation, to follow him. He took off his black robe, put on the uniform or the decor of a militia, and said, let's go do this. And so if you know anything about history, you will see that this Black Robe Regiment, the Christian tone against tyranny, was the main the support of this. General Washington would call on these men to pray and to encourage with sermons and messages when these men were growing battle weary, when they were discouraged. He would call on them to support us. A lot of these pastors rose in ranks as generals and leaders in General Washington's army. And I remember there was one instance when one particular pastor was, kind of not complacent, but didn't want to fight. And so what they did is the British burned his church down and killed his family. And from that point on, he says, you know what, it's time to act. And so evil always succeeds and gets away with its tyranny when good men do nothing about it. That's a kind of a quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And so, I say that because toxic masculinity is trying to be squashed, especially the Christian male. We don't want your voice to be heard. We don't want your opinions to be heard. I know I'm really nobody in light of the big United States, and maybe a few people might watch this, get a kick out of what I got to say, get mad at what I say. It doesn't really bother me. I'm just talking, hopefully strike some thought in your own head, in your own heart, that realize that the tyrant is at the door, trying to oppress and suppress our liberties that were fought for and bled for throughout the centuries of this great nation. And if we as Christian men don't stand and begin to speak up and stand up, I'm afraid that we won't see a generation of men come after us. They'll all be enslaved. Many of these men right now, younger men, are enslaved to their games, to their entertainment, to their laziness and to their excuses. And it's kind of sad when you look and observe, and you can't even see some people rise up in the midst of their own, churches, neighborhoods, engaging the enemy in outreach. They're just kicking back, relaxing. I, for one, am not going to sit back and take this. This is nonsense to me. So that's all I have. Just want to get that off my chest. I got a new mask, picked it up in America, and so I just want you to think about this whole thing, because tyranny has to stop. That's all I got to say. So y'all be good. Until next time, keep on keeping on.